All right, thanks everybody. Great meeting so far. I enjoyed the introductions and Phyllis' awesome keynote. Hopefully I can build off of what Phyllis started to discuss a little bit. I'm Sarah LeSage, Michigan's Aquatic Invasive Species Program Coordinator. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about AIS work. And when I say we, I mean kind of the royal we, not just the state staff that work in Eagle, DNR, and Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, but also the broader we, including partners, universities, SISMAs, and everyone. So just wanted to clarify and start with that. I'm going to turn my camera off here so I can see the slides. So, Phyllis really kicked us off, I think, on a good foundational presentation to think about invasive species more broadly and their role in ecosystems. And, really, I think a lot of us who have been working in this area for even a year or more, we start to see that when we're dealing with invasive species, we're addressing these legacy issues, long-term problems, while at the same time, we need to plan for new threats and respond to new invasions and new things that come at us that maybe are unexpected. This is really incredibly important and diverse work. Excuse me. For the last 3 years, among the state agency staff, we've held all staff meetings. So that's staff from DNR, Department of Ag, Eagle, Department of Transportation, and we focused initially on visioning for the invasive species program, identifying challenges, making plans, and implementing actions to address those challenges. But also part of our work has been to connect our accomplishments and our projects back to the state management plans, which are our foundational documents, and the priorities that are listed in those state management plans. And so in our all staff meeting that was just last month, the beginning of December, we took a moment to recognize the success and progress. And I see many of my colleagues on this meeting today. And so I'm going to present some slides from our all staff meeting. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. I always encourage people to use the chat. So if any of my colleagues want to add more detail or correct anything that I may have missed or misstated, please use the chat. If you have any questions, please put those in the chat too. I'll try to save some time to come back to those. So again, I'm recycling this presentation. This is what we used internally to put our work back into context of the plans. So it's certainly not all inclusive. It's really a snapshot of a couple of accomplishments that are related to the state management plan. But really, I think you can see the breadth of the issues and see the SISMA involvement in many of these successes. So I'll start off with aquatic invasive species, and then I'll hand it over to Susie to cover some of the terrestrial work. So I mentioned the state management plans as our foundational document. This is the cover here with the zebra mussels of the aquatic invasive species state management plan that was finalized in 2013. This is one of our initial big projects when the state got funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative when it was initiated in 2009-2010 timeframe. So from 2011 and 12, we worked on this complete overhaul of the existing state management plan. This is the third iteration of the plan. It went through the governor's office and to the federal ANS task force for approval. So that's our AIS state management plan. Within the aquatic invasive species state management plan, there's a section here. Each of these slides will look really similar with the priority listed from the plan on the left in the blue box, and then some of the content on the right. But there are some overarching recommendations that apply to all the goals of prevention, early detection and response, limiting the spread of invasive species, and controlling invasive species. And these focus on promoting collaboration to leverage expertise and resources, enhancing communication and coordination, education and outreach, and sustaining long-term funding. So I'll start here on a slide. This is a slide that Kevin Walters put together about promoting public-private collaboration. And these are some AIS examples that address the recreational boating pathway. Many of you are familiar with the AIS Landing Blitz. This is an annual event that relies heavily on coordination between state agencies and many local partners that we've done kind of as the keystone project for our annual AIS Awareness Week. So we have about 75 sites or events per year with hosts from a variety of different local entities, SISMAs, lake associations, and other. We combine those efforts with our Clean Boats, Clean Waters work that has been ongoing for a long time, but most recently, through federal funding, we've been able to support a new MSU Extension AIS educator. I believe Kelsey Bockelman is, or at least was on the meeting earlier. And so the new efforts have been kind of wrapping together some of these recreational boating outreach projects and also implementing a new mini grant program that's available to local entities. We started that in 2020. And that continues into this year. I think applications are under evaluation right now. The last piece on this collaborative part is about the MSU Mobile Boat Wash. Boat washes are owned by Eagle Water Resources Division, and then MSU Extension manages student crews to do outreach events across the state, mostly weekends, to talk to boaters about clean, drain, dry messaging. So again, you can kind of see some of the numbers here, but really this wouldn't be possible without that collaboration. This one isn't specific to aquatic invasive species, but is broader in aspect for the invasive species program. But this is just one example of the ways we continue to advance how we interact with professionals and members of the public on enhancing information and education efforts. And so if you haven't had a chance to check out the Not My Species webinar series, where we cover everything from hemlock woolly adelgid to SISMAs, parks, local work to invasive grass carp, all of those webinars are available. Thanks, Kevin. I see you posted a link in the chat. In the first year, we had 10 webinars with over 3,000 views. So over 2,000 views that were live, but also views of those recordings. And so it's really great to see that we've had a lot of diversity in topics and also a lot of diversity in the audience, where we have professionals, members of the public, and others. And so the participation and interest has been awesome. And also what we're really trying to do is make this information accessible so that people can come back to it or share it more broadly. The series will continue for 2021, 2022. One of the overarching goals in the AIS State Management Plan is securing stable funding. And that's for the AIS program, but really it spans both AIS and TIS to ensure implementation of the state management plan. So here's a figure that is included in Michigan's Invasive Species Program annual report. So we put this together every year. So the total funding for the program has been around $9 million annually. And you can see here in the largest piece of the pie, the blue piece, is our state appropriations. That's been right around $5 million, increasing slightly every year, but there are some other state appropriations included there beyond that general fund. But that's the piece that supports the Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program. The second biggest piece is our federal funds. This is Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, mainly for the AIS program, other funding sources for TIS. And then we have some restricted funds from both DNR and Eagle. Those might be related to fees or licenses. So again, this is fairly stable at this point with GLRI, but again, there is a pretty big piece here that is federal funding, and those are largely grants. So I'm going to transition into our Tier 1 aquatic invasive species priorities. And these are focused on three main pathways: canals and waterways, ballast water, and organisms in trade. The first thing I'll talk about is invasive bighead silver and black carp in the Chicago area waterway system. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but just some updates from a Michigan perspective. This project has really been 10 years in the making, and I do want to start by emphasizing there is still no evidence of live bighead or silver carp in the Great Lakes. eDNA surveillance is done annually by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in collaboration with DNR Fisheries Division, providing input and support. So really the biggest advancement in this area is the Brandon Road Interbasin Project with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Illinois as the state sponsor. Michigan has an $8 million contribution for the non-federal cost share for the implementation of this project. And really what it is, it's the first project of its kind in the country. It's very complicated engineering project where, focusing on this engineering channel that is essentially a gauntlet for fish to, deter fish from moving from the Mississippi River Basin into the Great Lakes. Here in this figure on the right, you can see the series of flushing locks, acoustic barriers, electric barriers, bubblers. So this is what is being proposed. The cost estimation is around $750 million, but there's work underway to determine how that cost might be squeezed a little bit so that its implementation is a little more feasible. The design is still underway, and those efforts are anticipated to conclude by 2024 and then to transition into implementation. Michigan does have a seat at those discussions, at the table for those discussions, and then states and provinces have a separate forum to build consensus to ensure that this project is implemented in a way that everybody's comfortable with. Efforts through Congress and otherwise working to secure that federal funding to move this important pathway project forward. The next big pathway is preventing the introduction of aquatic invasive species through ballast water discharge. The state of Michigan had its first state legislation back in 2002 that aimed towards increasing the reporting for compliance with best management practices. Since legislation passed in 2005, the state has implemented a ballast water permitting program that contains some of the most environmentally protective conditions, not just in the Great Lakes region, but across the country. Michigan has required treatment or certification of no discharge for ocean-going vessels calling on Michigan ports since 2007. There's been a lot of advancement, at the other scale. That was the state scale. We have the federal scale. Lots of changes over the years, but most recently, the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act was passed in 2018, which really overhauls vessel discharge and ballast water regulation in the U.S. by creating a new part of the Clean Water Act that essentially puts EPA in charge of establishing new standards and the U.S. Coast Guard in charge of monitoring, inspecting, and enforcing those standards. Ultimately, when the federal regulations are final, effective, and enforceable, this preempts state authority. So that was passed under the Trump administration. US EPA published a draft standard in October 2020, and Michigan submitted formal comments with the Attorney General's office. We denied our consistency, or we objected to our consistency determination under the Coastal Zone Management Act, and the governor submitted a formal objection of the draft standards. Under the new presidential administration in June 2021, US EPA initiated a re-engagement process with the states as part of the federalism consultation requirement. So we've had 10 meetings since June. So lots of activity on this front. And then I'll also mention there's been lots of advancement on research and development. The last pathway I'll talk about is organisms and trade. And this slide focuses on new requirements as of 2019 for the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, Part 413, which covers an invasive species. And this new section requires sellers of non-native aquatic organisms to report. So that's individuals, trade show requirements, it's pretty broad. And really this reporting, which occurs in March, helps us understand who is selling, what they're selling, and not only that, but where that selling is occurring. So since 2019, there have been almost 1,000 registration, and Fisheries Division, Department of Ag, and Law Enforcement Division continue to work together to increase compliance along with some of our partners in extension to communicate these requirements. And so here on this figure, you can see, thanks Kevin, I see 5 minutes. You can see kind of the count of registrations by year. Don't look at the 2021 because the reporting has not come in yet, but you can kind of see the trend of registration and then reporting that kind of jumped from 2019 to 2020. This has really been helpful to understand pathways. A recent example is the zebra mussel mossball work that happened last year. I'll talk a little bit more about law enforcement for organisms and trade. Law enforcement continues to work on with Michigan State Police motor carriers, and see what you see in this picture here is eviscerated carp, which is a new requirement through fisheries order. And so DNR law has had really productive patrols, but also is building relationships on border crossings, as well as working with other states. Here you can see a list. One example is SISMA coordinator report tip-off in live food market sales in Lansing of red swamp crayfish. In that case, the sellers didn't know that it was unlawful to sell red swamp crayfish, but backtracking through wholesalers led to some other larger scale prosecutions in Wisconsin and Illinois. And then law enforcement continues to work on these types of projects, as well as general inspections of local pet stores and live markets. Tier 2 priorities focus on EDR, early detection and response. One of our main response actions is about red swamp crayfish, and DNR Fisheries Division is leading this effort in collaboration with Michigan State University and many other partners to develop plans that have the 5 listed goals, but also to kind of implement these plans through a variety of actions. Red swamp crayfish have been a priority since 2017, when the first detection in the wild was discovered. Much of the early work has focused on trapping and removal of red swamp crayfish from kind of these 7 complexes or interconnected populations like golf course ponds or stormwater ponds. So those trapping removals have been successful in suppressing populations, but recognizing they are unlikely to achieve eradication. And so those trapping efforts have really ramped up, removed over 1,500 crayfish, but also projects addressing pathways, the movement of red swamp crayfish, the genetics, life history, and then also the implementation of innovative treatments like pyrethrin, which is a chemical control, happened in 2021. So here's a snapshot of what that looked like under an experimental use scenario. And you can see here, just as an idea, at this one pond, trapping removed 1,700 removed via daily trapping over a 2-month period. During the chemical treatment, there were almost as many removed. So there was a pretty huge reduction in the number of red swamp crayfish. There's more work continuing on other innovative techniques like heat, sound, CO2 as attractants, and how we can increase trapping efficiency and control. The other side of the coin for, so that was our animals, for our watch list aquatic plants. Many of you are also familiar with this, with lots of SISMA involvement for aquatic invasive plants. Thank you, Kevin. I see 1 minute. What we've seen here is ongoing work since, I think, 2012 under Wildlife Division, under Water Resources Division leadership. We've kind of maintained and enhanced those efforts where we're seeing eradication over multi-year control efforts. Tier 3 is local management and control. And so this is my last slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are enhancing coordination and technical assistance and the development of best management practices through the European Frogbit Collaborative. This collaborative has been ongoing since 2018 with fantastic SISMA engagement and support. Some of the things that we've seen happen over the last year, for example, is the development of European Frogbit Survey Quick Capture app that's being used broadly by many partners and shared across the region to Wisconsin. And we're continuing with additional funding to support the implementation of the European Frogbit Adaptive Management Framework through grants to SISMAs, through the Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program, grants to SISMAs in the UP to continue surveillance and response to European Frogbit. So much more that I wasn't able to cover and list: ag inspectors, recreational boating inspections, MISGP projects, response to Didimo, Ripple. So please, if you have any questions, drop those into the chat. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand it over to Susie.